afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our first webinar series in 2022. My name is Shanika Moore, and I am tasked to introduce the moderator and webinar. The GENE is an NGO that seeks to improve the nutritional health of our population, and we focus especially on students from the earliest age through to tertiary level. We are a charity, and as such, we accept donations towards our work. This can be submitted via our website, which is fully up and functional at www.jamaicannutrition.com. Most of the resources are free of cost. You may, however, join as members for subscription to our specific educational tools and learning aids. We also offer courses in nutrition and wellness through our online school, Institute of Nutrition and Wellness Studies. Email us if you wish to take any of our courses. If you wish for certificates of attendance for continuing education credits, please contact us at nutritionjamaica@gmail.com. Our theme today is nutrition in endurance for elite and student athletes, where we wish to look at the role of nutrition in sports that is often overlooked by many persons. This webinar therefore seeks to promote proper nutrition for elite and student athletes' optimal performance. During the session, if you have any questions, please write them into the chat room, and the extra time will be used to discuss those not already dealt with. Before we begin, I'll be introducing our moderator for today. Patricia Thompson is a registered nutritionist and also the executive director of the Jamaica Island Nutrition Network, GENE. Patricia is qualified with degrees in general science, Masters of Science in Nutrition, a postgraduate diploma in management studies, and has certifications in curriculum development, psychology, counseling, health promotion, all from the University of the West Indies. As a school nutrition specialist in sports dietetics and as a master's sports nutritionist, she is also the author of several Caribbean nutrition texts used regionally, which can be seen on the GENE website for sale. Patricia has worked in diverse areas of nutrition practice and has served as consultant to numerous clients in the public and private sectors in Jamaica, the Caribbean region, and internationally. She is a former nutrition educator with the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, CFNI, and served as the health and she has also served as health and a nutrition specialist in the USAID sponsored New Horizons project with the Ministry of Education. She has received many awards for her work, including the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the A&D in the US, Caribbean Association of Nutritionists and Dietitians, CANDI, recognition by the IOC committee. Please welcome the moderator and speakers.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Shanika. We have a wealth of information for you here today. And we have three eminent, well-qualified presenters who will give you all the information on endurance nutrition that you need. And if you still wish more, you'll have time at the end to do questions. The format here is that we will start with our bios of the three presenters, and then we will get into the topics that they will be talking about. So let's start with the general bios. Dr. Michelle Holt, she's a medical doctor, graduate of the University of the West Indies with MBBS, and Doctor of Medicine in Sports and Exercise Medicine. She practices in general and sports medicine and is well known in the area of sports, having been a national player with hockey. She was national captain and national coach and administrator and president of the Hockey Federation. She now serves as a team doctor for hockey and other teams such as netball. Dr. Holt is a sports management specialist who works well with patients. She's experienced in pain management, sport management specialist, and rehabilitation. Her services include event coverage, sports medicine, pain medicine, exercise medicine, injury rehabilitation. Upon diagnosis, she takes a personalized approach, which includes communicating with patients regularly and offering support until the patient is satisfied. Clients can rest assured as they are guaranteed professional and personalized care. And you will surely hear this, it will come across today in her interviews. She will be speaking about fitness testing, screening of the athletes with consideration for endurance nutrition factors. I just finished off the introductions. Mr. Ian Campbell. He's a young researcher and biostatistician who has a burning love for sports and athleticism. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry and has submitted his dissertation for a PhD in biochemistry at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. His main research focus is comprehending the biochemistry of overtraining in athletes, where he examines nutrition as a mechanism in the pathophysiology of overtraining. In 2017, he received the prestigious UWI's postgraduate scholarship and served as a UWI Graduate Studies Special Envoy. Mr. Campbell has published over 10 peer-reviewed journal articles, 7 of which he is the first author. His research has been presented on the local and international levels through various conferences. Currently, he's employed at the Ministry of Health and Wellness as a biostatistician in the Health Status Monitoring Unit. His work also spans the discipline of epidemiology as he assumes duties as an officer at National Epidemiology. Mr. Rashid Perry. He holds a BSc in dietetics and nutrition and a master's in public health nutrition from the University of Technology, Jamaica. He currently serves as a lecturer and wellness center coordinator within the School of Allied Health and Wellness in the College of Health Sciences, also at the University of Technology. His love for science of nutrition has led him down a path of improving consumption practices that supports athletic performance, especially among our young athletes. He's a published author, dynamic presenter, and a teacher at heart. In addition, he serves as course lead for the Sports Nutrition and Fluid Management module and body composition analyst for the University Wellness Center. He's an early career researcher and academic with a passion for policy development and advocacy. His areas therefore cover food security, non-communicable and communicable diseases, food science and nutraceutical technology, supplementation, nutrient supplementation, and the interplay with other factors. So please welcome our panel today, who are going to give us a rich diet on sports nutrition. As I said, we will start with Dr. Michelle Holt. Dr. Holt, welcome. Now, you have been a medical consultant with a number of sporting teams and examined the athletes for fitness. We always here make sure you check with your doctor first to see if you are fit enough to train and compete. Could you share with us some findings generally or sport specific that would relate to nutrition as it affects endurance or stamina?
Thank you very much for having me as a part of your esteemed panel. And just saying good afternoon to all the people who are online and listening in. The first thing I thought I'd say is what I actually do in terms of the consultation with the client, the athletes. And how I approach it is that I do a past history to see what their injuries and illnesses are. And then I'll do a present history to see at what stage in their training period they are, and ask them some questions. How are you physically? How are you mentally? Are you tired? And then I'll ask them about the future. What competition coming up? And what are your goals for that competition? Part of my physical is, of course, you do your height, weight, check the BMI, do your blood pressure and pulse, do the physical, focusing on heart and musculoskeletal. And I'll do an ECG and I'll do a blood test. Of course, we do the movement screen and then we do a fitness test as well. When I take all that information, I'm thinking about what is the sport requirements, and I'm thinking about things like the body composition that's been proven ideal for that sport in terms of success, and what are the fitness ideals. And I also take into consideration what are the risks for that person in terms of the gender, the age, the sport they're going to be playing, and the economic realities that person faces. And my findings so far, in doing a lot of these medicals, in terms of the females in all sports, is anemia. I find that so many, at least 10% of the people who I see are anemic. A lot of the court players have stress fractures. Some of the hockey players have had stress fractures in their spine. A lot of the netballers and court players have stress fractures in their shins. A lot of the footballers that I see might have stress fractures in their feet. Also, they have the two sides of the weight control. I have the high BMI people who they're overweight and they're trying to lose weight on some diet that is probably just not the right one. And then you have the underweight people who are trying to put on the weight and to bulk up. And I'm finding a lot of them with, especially girls again, with menstrual problems, with psychological problems. They're depressed, they're cutters, and more than anything else, they're not performing up to what they want to be performing at, and they're just not happy. So that's basically it. And a lot of the males that I've found have a lot of old injuries that are occurring again once they start training. That's been the general findings for when I do my medical consult with the teams.
Okay, great. That's really very thorough. You mentioned a term there, anemia, that some persons may not understand. And, many of us have sickle cell anemia, which is what we know about. And we want to know, well, what does nutrition have to do with anemia and sport? Could you explain a little bit how that functions, since we know that the anemia you're really referring to is the nutrient iron in relation to sport? Mm-hmm.
That's right. So anemia simply is low, to keep it as simple as possible, is low red blood cells. We know that the red blood cells carry the oxygen to the muscles for the exercise. And when you're anemic, you don't have the number of red blood cells that you need to efficiently carry more and more oxygen to the exercising muscles. We have different reasons for anemia, especially in the sporting athlete. As we say, as I said before, I think that in women menstruating, there's blood loss and there's not adequate replacement of the key components that make up our red blood cells. So that's the iron or vitamin B12 or folic acid. There's also that you're running and your heel is striking and you're destroying red blood cells, and that's a part of the contribution. And then there's this whole dilution of the blood, where the blood volume is more because you're exercising, and that presents as anemia. So there are lots of causes for anemia, but in terms of nutrition, it's likely to be iron or B12 for those people who are the vegetarians and just don't eat meat, and folic acid for the people who are on fat diets and not eating as they should. So the problem with anemia, I think is going on to anticipate the question, is that because you're not carrying enough oxygen to the brain and to the muscles, they're going to be tired. They're going to be mentally tired as well as physically tired. So in terms of the mental aspect of it, no focus, no attention, poor concentration. And of course, that's going to affect not just your academics, but your whole training. And with lots of concentration, bad decisions, bad judgment, and all of that. And in terms of the physical thing, you're not going to get the training effects. You're working so hard, but the performance is going to be poor because the muscles need the oxygen to carry, to do the building and all the training effects that you're looking for. And so iron is a big part of the problem in our diets. And as you will tell them, I'm hoping, it's a replacement of the iron that you're going to lose. You're going to use iron because you're bleeding, but you use iron to build muscles. It's a very important part of your diet. And I think in Jamaica, it really is a big problem for our women.
Yes, just to give them an idea of the extent of that big problem for women. I must mention that I work at the UA Health Center. And, the blood bank goes around to do their blood drive. And, well, before the COVID, they came to the students for donations. And can you believe that over 50% of these students were turned away because they were anemic? They could not give blood. So that's to show you, if we extrapolate to the athletic population, how many of them could actually be anemic, and so their performance is affected. You mentioned also fractures. Again, a nutrition factor rings a bell there for me. Tell us about that.
Right. All right. So, and this is, what I'm telling you is these are things that I've found in a very small population. So if I do a team of 20, I'm going to find 3 or 4 kids with fractures. And I'm not talking about where you get a blow and break your foot. I'm talking about something called stress fractures, which is that the bone, when you stress it, breaks down and it needs to be built back up. And nutrition is a big part of building that back up, as well as the amount of exercise that you're doing. And what we find is that there's more breaking down of the bone than there's building up. And I think everybody here should know that one of the nutrients that's important in bone build-up is calcium. And particularly now adolescent athletes, where they're growing, and growing means that your bone is lengthening and it's getting thicker and stronger for both boys and girls. In that adolescent period, the pubertal period, when you're growing, you need a lot of calcium. And the problem is that if we're having a diet that's deficient in calcium, then the bone is not as strong as it needs to be. And then as we start to exercise and put more stress on the bone and break it down, and we're not having the replacement to give the bone the strength, then the bone is becoming weak and thin, and it's likely to get fractured, especially runners you run on the road, somebody who's kicking a ball a lot, you're playing on the court and you're playing a lot. And therefore, I have found there's a lot of stress factors, which of course are going to affect the performance, because there's going to be pain with the stress fracture. And then our treatment of stress fractures is rest from the activity, and you miss seasons. I've had athletes at the national level now that have to have had surgery, and we have to be intervening in their diets a lot to keep them playing, because some of them earn money from playing their sports. I think there's a classic story, Pat, where a 400, there's 4x4 relay, I can't remember which Olympics or games, where one of the legs actually had a stress fracture, the fibular bone, and Jamaica lost the medal because the bone broke in the middle of the race. That was a stress fracture that caused it.
Wow. And as you mentioned, the downtime now, when they get a fracture and they can't exercise then the body composition changes, as you mentioned. And of course,
Yes.
those with the overweight, when they have to have that rehabilitation period and they get obese. But that is such a big topic. I think I'm going to leave that until a little later because
And
I don't even touch hydration as yet. You know, which is another big
factor.
area. Right, but we're going to come back. So in the interim, can you just give us one message that you, as a sports medicine doctor, would have for the trainers, the coaches, the youngsters, the parents, in terms of the role of the nutritionist, although we're going to come to that in more detail.
All right, yeah. So to end my thing there, listen, there's nutrition for health. If you're a parent and your adolescent is in the growth phase, your nutrition is there for health, for them to grow and achieve academically, to be able to perform. They need the carbs, the fat, the proteins. And then when we add sports and exercise to that, where they need more nutrition and specific nutrition at specific times, depending on the period of their training, it's a lot. So I think parents, if you're going to get your kids into sports, I think that the advice of a nutritionist is going to be key. It's a lot. It's too much sometimes for you to think you can do on your own. I think that where you can help with it, nutrition for health, do that, but ask for qualified people to help with performance. There's a lot of new information.
Thank you so much. This has been extremely enlightening. And so we will now move on to our biochemist, Mr. Ian Campbell. Now, some people might be wondering what biochemistry has to be doing with nutrition. So we need to let you know, first of all, that biochemistry is one of the foundation subjects for studying nutrition. You know, I know in my day, at the UWI, nutrition comes under the Faculty of Medicine. And that was one of the prerequisites for getting into the course at the master's level. So it's no surprise that Mr. Ian Campbell, as a biochemistry, should have this passion for sports nutrition and has made this one of his main areas of study. And he speaks to overtraining. So, Mr. Campbell, tell us about that a little bit before we get into your specific findings. What made you go into sports nutrition?
I was an athlete myself, and I struggled with injuries and maybe fatigue. So as an academic, I wanted to know the underlying reasons for that. And I liked the science. So I applied my knowledge of linking science to sports, to what I love. So that's the ultimate reason for going into biochemistry, or trying to link biochemistry with athletic performance or sports science.
Okay, so you say you perceived that nutrition had something to do with your performance as an athlete.
As an athlete,
so
in terms of fatigue, in terms of,
yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the fatigue I felt, because it could be due to lack of energy or not consuming enough energy sources. So that could be the attribution to the fatigue I felt as an athlete.
So that speaks to the quantum of food or the amount of energy, right? Or energy nutrients. So we know energy nutrients are very important in terms of sports. And the relationship of the different energy nutrients, carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And so you made this the focus of your research, looking at the diet composition in terms of the proportion of energy nutrients. So tell us what you found and how do you see this in relation to endurance in the athletes?
So before going into the findings, I'll start with what or how the research was done. So the research is a cohort study. And by a cohort study, I mean it's a longitudinal study. So it's a study that was conducted over the entire athletic season. So we looked at the athlete at baseline, then we looked at them at the different training phase. So by baseline, I mean before formal training began. And by training phase, I mean the different training phases, such as the preparatory phase, the pre-competitive phase, and the competition phase. So we looked at nutrition and hydration patterns of athletes at baseline, during preparation, during pre-competition, and during competition. So yeah, basically nutrition and hydration status were collected 4 times. So these measures are collected 4 times across the athletic season. Then we compared nutrition and hydration patterns in athletes who adapted to the training cycle to those who maladapted to the training cycle. And by maladapted, I mean these athletes showed decrements in performance, 10% or more. These athletes had concomitantly high fatigue compared to the adapted athlete who improved performance, or they maintained performance and fatigue throughout the athletic season. So what I found now, so in terms of hydration, we found that hydration levels were exceeded the American College of Sports Medicine recommendation for pre-training hydration. So you're supposed to go into training with a level of hydration, with a level of water in the system. So we found that these athletes were underhydrated. This was not different from non-athletes. So we found that underhydration is a global problem in the general population of adolescents. Another finding, we found that adapted athletes, their dietary pattern were significantly different from athletes who maladapted to training. So in terms of the dietary pattern difference, we found that adapted athletes, they had greater total caloric intake and total carbohydrate intake than the maladapted athlete. Also, we observed that the dietary approach adapted athlete, remember I said that adapted athlete, these athletes, they improve performance and they manage their fatigue. So these athletes, their diet composition was, the diet approach used was different from the maladapted athlete. So we found that the adapted athlete, they use they use a structured dietary approach. So a conventional dietary approach would be carbohydrate, the predominant source, where 50 to 60% of the diet is carbohydrate, 20% protein, and between 20 to 35% fat. So in comparison, the maladapted athlete, they neither use a conventional nor a structured dietary approach. Now other structured dietary approach, such as a ketogenic diet or low carbohydrate, high fat diet. And lastly, we found that athletes' dietary composition, in particular their carbohydrate and their caloric intake during preparation phase predicted whether the athlete adapted or maladapted. So what I'm saying, their early dietary composition or dietary approach, so that is during preparation, it was able to predict how they performed during competition.
Yes, that is very interesting and also very academic. So we needed to break it down a little for us. You speak a lot about this carbohydrate and fat and adaptation and so on. Because when we speak about carbohydrate in Jamaica, people know this as food.
Right.
We in Jamaica eat plenty of food that is high carbohydrate. And I know there was a lot of hapula when Bolt was at the height of his performance about him coming from Trelawney and eating yam. So what are these high carbohydrate items in the diet that you are looking at and speaking to relative to fat? Where will the fat come from?
So while we didn't really focus on diet quality or the diet or timing of diet or those things, we just focus crudely on carbohydrate. But from my observation, these carbohydrates came from the rice source, the yam source, the bread sources. But when I speak about low carbohydrate intake, I mean these athletes were not consuming enough carbohydrate to match their energy demands. So they were under consuming. That is a maladaptive athlete. That is athletes who did not adapt to the training program. They were under consuming carbohydrate sources or energy sources in comparison to athletes who adapted to training.
Okay, so let's look at some of these carbohydrate sources specifically, because you spoke about hydration. And
Right.
we know that Jamaican hydration, we're talking about fluid, right? But not necessarily water, okay? And now in these days when the messages are coming out over the media about not drinking, not consuming sugar, we can readily see where the problem of hydration will come in, because if you are not taking drinks with sugar, right, and you don't drink enough water to replace, we can readily see how you become dehydrated very easily. What does a speaker in terms of policies in schools and generally in the media and to the curricula that we have for competitions? What should coaches insist on with their young athletes to ensure this hydration that you speak of?
All right, so my recommendation for coaches or sports practitioners would be to implement nutrition and hydration practices such as planned or individualized nutrition and fluid intake regimen. So which means that, coaches may not know the proportion of water, the proportion of fluid an athlete should consume. So as somebody is working within governance, I would encourage policymakers to put these in policy or to put guidelines for the for nutritional consumption for long duration, high intense training athletes, and also hydration guidelines for these athletes, because it's very important. So as the research finding is showing, these are detrimental to performance, and these can lead to overtraining, which is a real imbalance between the athletes recovering and balancing it with their balancing recovery with training stress.
Yeah, we have to clarify that, because some people don't understand the overtraining. Next thing you know, the coaches start to go too easy on the athletes and say, "Try, you're training too much, go home." That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the ratio or the relativity. So just explain that.
So overtraining is important for performance improvements. So an athlete need to be overtrained, and I put this in quotation, because that's how the athletes will develop a threshold for peak performance. But while overtraining this athlete, the athlete should be recovered, and nutrition is an important part in this athlete's recovery. So in the recovery regime or recovery strategy, nutrition is an important factor. So because muscle, so it is important to replenish the muscle, to replenish cognitive function. Cognitive function has to do with hormonal imbalance. So nutrition is important in hormonal imbalance for cognitive functioning. So cognitive function has to do with the athlete's concentration, the athlete's depression, and those things. So if the athlete is undernourished, the athletes will not recover properly. And if this athlete is not recovered properly, this athlete will develop or go into a syndrome called overtraining syndrome, which comes with a lot of bad symptoms, such as fatigue. So fatigue is one symptom, depression is one symptom, lack of concentration is one symptom, sleep disturbance is one symptom, and also sleep alongside nutrition are the main factor for recovery, or for recovering from training stress.
Right, so we see a lot of implications here, and sometimes we don't understand the use of terms, because recently we've been hearing about mental health of people because of the COVID. And so now you are talking about the mental health of the athletes, but from a slightly different perspective. But to move right along, we want to draw attention to policy. I saw somebody commenting that they can see where the nutritionists have to get into play, right? Even for hydration, because as we say, if we pass policy to ban this and ban that from the school, we have to put something else in place. And as a sports nutrition, as a school nutrition specialist, where I look at the comprehensive approach, I have to mention that some schools don't even have pipe water. They don't even have pipe water, and we go banning the source of their hydration. We need to therefore give them the hydration to replace. What say you on that, Mr. Campbell?
So what say my opinion?
Yes, the policy needs to be more comprehensive, you don't think? You can't just be banning. What are we putting in its place?
So I'd encourage,
I'm putting you on the spot.
I'd encourage policy and decision maker. They could facilitate dietetic practice working group closer with athletes in these institutions, especially institution with high-level athletes. I think we need dietetic practice working group to work in this institution along with athletes in particular, along with students, because even nutrition is important for academic functioning because it can, disrupt concentration. So these group now, this dietetic group now, they could provide nutritional guidelines tailored for athletes to provide the athletes, not only the athlete, but also the caregiver with information how to keep energy up, as well as to teach them the practice to practice appropriate nutrition intake for before, during, and after exercise, because nutrition intake is different before, during, and after exercise. So that's where dietetic practice group should come in to tailor these intervention for these athletes.
Indeed, Mr. Campbell. So we see where policy is going in. Just as how we have school nurses and school guidance counselors, we need to start looking at school sports nutritionists to see how they can service such an important and influential group for the country's well-being in terms of the international arena. So this takes us now into Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry, because you are going to answer now all these issues that have been raising, because you say you like policy and all these kinds of things. So tell us, and we don't even touch meal patterns yet, and meal timing, spacing of meals relative to athletics. You just heard Mr. Campbell saying before, during, and after is different for hydration and for fueling and so on. So first of all, comment on that aspect, right? And how the nutritionist can play a role in that aspect of sports nutrition.
All right. Again, thank you for having me. As it relates to hydration, it's an issue we're seeing across the board, even with our university level athletes. Now, there is something that happens across cultures when it comes to hydration, and it's a thought process that you should wait until you're thirsty to get something to drink, right? And a lot of us growing up, we're given these principles that, when you're thirsty, that means you should drink water. But by the time you become thirsty, thirst is an indication of dehydration. So you're already at the point of being dehydrated. So what we're finding with a lot of the athletes when it comes to their hydration status, they tend, when you ask them, they'll tell you, well, I don't want any water, no, I don't want anything to drink, no, I don't feel thirsty. And then they wait until that trigger of thirst, then they'll get something to drink. So we tend to see that across the board within our athletes. And even the point you brought up with the banning of beverages in some schools, that's also another concern as well, because you're banning these beverages, but there are no replacements. Some schools don't have proper facilities in terms of providing running water for the students. And when you now ban these items wholeheartedly without giving a replacement, then you tend to have issues, because we have to realize that many schools are being run like businesses, yes, and they need to make a profit. And one of the profits that they make are from these items. So if we can provide them with an alternative or items at a lower cost that are considered more healthful, then at least these schools will be able to provide hydration to the children.
Indeed, and as you mentioned, healthful. So many people misinterpret what healthful foods mean. And in terms of the athlete, we heard from Mr. Campbell that we're talking about high carbohydrate foods, and how frequently should they be eating this high carbohydrate foods, especially with respect to the competition and training sessions? Let's speak about that.
All right. Now, the first thing we must put out there is that when it comes to our young athletes, at least from the perspective of nutrition, they're considered a vulnerable group because, again, they're still growing. There are changes that are happening within their bodies. So when we're assessing them for different therapies or interventions, we have to bear that in mind. Now, a lot of persons, when they hear the term carbohydrates, you hear the term sugar, people, step back and be like, oh, carbohydrates are bad or sugars are bad. What I can tell you is that your athletes definitely need the additional sugars in order for them to carry out the activities that they're taking part in. Now, for a lot of us, based on what the media has been promoting over the years, that sugar is bad, sugar is bad, sugar is bad, you'll find a lot of athletes who are now moving away from these sugars and deciding not to have them any at all. Now, when it comes to the meals that are selected, what I suggest is for those teams that they work with a nutrition professional so that the meal times are designed to fit into the schedule that they have. So pretty much you would have your pre-meal before the event. Of course, you would want a meal that is high fat or too high protein before your training. You preferably have something that is high carbohydrates, have some amount of protein, but not a whole heap of fat. So like a shake, you could have a shake before training. During training, you are going to need a carbohydrate source to take you from routine to routine. And of course, at the end of the event, you want to ensure that you're having a meal. Now, one of the issues we're seeing when it comes to meal consumptions, we're having athletes going into training without having anything to eat, right? They're training for many hours. They're not having anything in between the routines. And at the end, you see them with this large plate of food, right? And it's normally something high fat, not necessarily what you would want as a post-exercise meal. So these are some things that we have to look at. And when it comes to meal planning, my suggestion is work with a nutritionist. They are able to take you through the process. I know a lot of things have been posted on social media. Everybody goes to Dr. Google for everything, but I can tell you, the information that you're getting is not always correct. And we have a tendency of taking that information, implementing it, and it doesn't work. Because I'm so surprised up to now that we still have coaches who believe that their athletes must be getting a whole bottle of peanut butter. When you have them buy a large bottle of peanut butter and in a day or two, the peanut butter is finished, right? And again, they would have seen that information on Google and decided to apply it to their own teams. So it's important that nutrition is handled by your nutritionist, your sports nutritionist, so that they can guide you through the process.
Yes, because peanut butter is so very expensive, especially in these days when people losing jobs and don't have the money and so on. They have to get some suggestions as to be what are affordable foods. And to just circle back, I said I was meant to circle back to what Dr. Holt had said about the various nutrients. We spoke about iron and calcium. And I am amazed at how many people still think that green banana is a good source of iron. Indeed, it is a good source of carbohydrate, and we wish to encourage it, but what about iron? Yes. What do we eat the green banana with to get this iron?
All right, so I think this came from the misunderstanding. When you leave a green banana out and it changes color, it gets brown, people are like, oh my gosh, the iron is causing it to change color, but that's not true. Now, the best available sources of iron comes from your animal sources, but you also get iron from your plant sources of food as well, right? Now, the plant sources we're focusing on are more of your green leafy vegetables. We want you to eat more vegetables in the diet. So those we would promote the most, but of course, when having your green leafy vegetables, we'll also suggest that you pair that with some form of citrus food, whether some orange juice or some lemonade. so that you are able to get as much of that iron as possible. But when it comes to like your green banana, your potatoes, your yams, I mean, people, when we see them change color, the first thing that comes to mind is iron. And yes, iron changes color when exposed. Well, the ions themselves and in the metal changes color when exposed to air, but that's not the reason why these items are changing color. So don't think that you need to eat a whole bunch of green banana to get the iron, okay?
Yes, I always like to tell people, I believe what happens is that traditionally, the foods we tend to eat with the green banana and those provisions and so on, tend to be high in iron because you mentioned meat.
Yes.
And there comes the organ meat like the liver, which is high in iron, and B12, Dr. Holt mentioned. Unfortunately, the young people don't like that anymore. I don't know what has been happening, and that goes very well with green. Just yesterday, I got 6 green banana high carbohydrate for only $50. You know, so and in addition to that, now we have the canned bony fish like the mackerel. You know, not the salt mackerel, but the canned bony fish. That in addition to the iron, you get calcium as well. And we heard Dr. Cruz speaking about calcium. Well, what else can we get calcium from?
All right, so outside of the canned fish, the bones, because it's not only eating the meat, you have to eat the bones as well. And we find a lot of young people, they pick the bones out and just have the meat only, right? But you need to have the bones as well. You can also get calcium from dairy sources, but that's a little tricky because not everybody's able to tolerate dairy. So you can get calcium from your vegetables as well. Persons are so surprised that calcium is in vegetables. And I'm like, guys, calcium is found in vegetables as well. It's not only dairy, right? So a lot of the green vegetables that we have, you can find calcium in as well. So there are other options for calcium. But what I find though, is that the sources of calcium that that we are promoting for the most part, a lot of young people are just staying away from it. So whether it's the organ meats, when it comes to vegetable intake, I mean, a lot of young people are like, I don't like this, I don't like that. But sometimes it's how the meals are prepared. And for a lot of young people, they'll actually eat it to them once it looks appealing. But, you know, for us as Jamaicans, we're used to cooking things a certain way, and that's that. We're not going to change it for nobody. But sometimes we need to make changes so that they will actually like what they're eating. Because as human beings, food is no longer just eating it because you need to live. Food has other ties to it. And for us as Jamaicans, food needs to be flavorful and it's supposed to look good, right? If it not look good, I guarantee the Jamaican is going to walk past because they're going to be like, then what up on the plate? What is that? And it's the same thing for your children as well. They see these things. So if they see it, it looks not appealing, we're not going to have it. And when it comes to the adolescents, they're a whole different ballgame because their eating habits tend to change every day, right? So these are some small things that we have to look into.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because we have to understand that cultural eating, different practices are changing. And as you mentioned, the shake, that might appeal to the youngsters, but not necessarily to the older people who might be saying, well, you know, and then now the shakes allow them to have milk, even if not the regular cow's milk that might affect them, but they have milk in different forms. But as you mentioned, the athlete needs to be very careful in that when you're getting the calcium, but you're not getting it at the expense of the calories and the carbohydrates, because different milks are for different purposes, as we have mentioned. So there again, the nutritionist plays a role. So in terms of the meal spacing, now coming back to the meal spacing, can you comment on the school schedule, for example, and how when you are working with these student athletes, how you factor that in to ensure that they are getting the meals and the snacks? That's another bad word for some people, snacks. So tell me about these snacks and the meal spacing and timing.
All right, as it relates to the meal spacing for for a lot of the student athletes, it's a little bit tedious because they will have school, let's say between 8 to 2, right? Now, we try as best as possible to encourage them to have meals throughout the day. So of course, we encourage them to start with their breakfast, to have their lunch, and then by the time they come to training, at least they would have had some amount of carbohydrate or sugars in the bloodstream, as well as what is being stored in muscles and other organs. So at least they can start the activities off right. But what we're finding is, especially in the adolescents, it's a little bit difficult because they tend not to eat the foods that would be quite beneficial to them in terms of preparing them for the activities that they have. We find that for a lot of the items that they may choose items that are savory in taste, but not necessarily high enough in carbohydrates that will give them the added energy that they need. Or they'll choose items that are high in fat, for example. And then by the time they get to training, because fat has an effect on the digestive process in terms of how long it occurs for. And for some of these students, they consume a very, very large lunch. I've seen students where they buy a box food, it has like 3 pieces of chicken, the rest of it is filled with rice, the rice is swimming in gravy, and a tubs of vegetables on the side. And by the time they get to training, they have no energy to do anything, again, because that digestive process has been prolonged. So when it comes to the school system, it's a little bit difficult for us working with